If you've ever loved someone so much that you slowly stopped feeling like yourself, if your mood, your sleep, your peace, even your sense of worth started depending on one person, if you called that love, but what it gave you was anxiety, people-pleasing, and the constant fear of being left, then don't be too quick to say you don't know how to love. That may not be the problem. The problem might be that you confused intimacy with rescue. Far beyond the southern islands, near the edge of the sea fog, there was a harbor that almost never appeared on maps. It was called Twinstar Harbor. It wasn't a place for merchants. It wasn't a place for romance. It took in only one kind of person. People wrecked by love. Some came after a breakup. Some came after betrayal. Some came after years of trying to hold together something that was already sinking. But what had really gone under was rarely just the relationship. It was their sense of self. Twinstar Harbor had an old rule. If the sea fog brought you there, you weren't allowed to leave right away, because the sea knew something most people learn too late. If you turn another person into your life preserver, you'll end up drowning again, no matter how many times you make it back to shore. Ethan arrived on a cold night in heavy rain. He looked like a ship that had barely survived a storm. The frame was still standing. The mast was still there, but the whole thing leaned just enough to make you think one more wave would finish it. He was soaked through, and in his hand he still carried a navigation lamp that had gone dark a long time ago. Like some part of him still refused to admit he'd lost his way. The relationship had lasted 5 years. For a long time, he thought this was the person he'd build a life with. For them, he changed the direction of his work. He let go of things he used to love. He got used to pushing his own needs farther and farther back. He kept telling himself the same thing. If I give enough, bend enough, and endure enough, this will work. But when the other person left, they left behind only one sentence: "You make it hard for me to breathe." That line hit Ethan like an anchor dropped straight into his chest. He couldn't make sense of it. How does giving everything make someone want to get away from you? That night, the harbor was almost completely dark. Only one black tower stood at the edge of the docks, and high above it hung 2 star lamps that never touched. One faced east, one faced west. They lit the same sea, but kept the same steady distance. Every sailor knew those lights. They were the mark of Twinstar Harbor, and they were also its oldest lesson. Love lasts longer when it leaves room to breathe. When Ethan was brought into the tower, only one man sat inside. He wore a long, deep blue coat, like he had wrapped the night sea around his shoulders. His face was calm, sharp, unreadable, and his eyes had the kind of clarity you only get after watching too many people mistake chaos for love. Spread across the table in front of him was a sea chart. No treasure, no shortcuts, just tides, reefs, wind patterns, and the routes of ships that had already gone down. His name was Orion. He was the keeper of the Black Tower. Ethan sat across from him, holding a cup of tea that had almost gone cold, and asked the only question he still knew how to ask. If I changed this much for someone, why did they still leave? Orion looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, very calmly, because a lot of what you were calling love wasn't love. It was survival. Ethan looked up. There was pain in his face, but also resistance. Orion didn't soften it. He reached to the side and pushed an old life preserver across the table. The rope was frayed. The edges were worn down. It looked like something that had been held onto for far too long. The deepest part of your pain, Orion said, isn't that he left. It's that you built the relationship on the wrong idea from the start. Then he looked straight at Ethan and said, you weren't really loving beside him. You were holding on to him to stay afloat. The room went quiet. The next morning, Orion took Ethan to the first place he needed to see. Not the lover's pier, the broken seawall. Damaged ships sat there in a long line. Some had been torn open by storms. Others looked almost fine from the outside, but had slowly filled with water from within. Orion pointed to one cracked vessel. People think relationships fail because there wasn't enough love, he said. But most ships don't sink because of the wave outside. They sink because there was already a breach inside. Then he said, "Happiness is an inside job. You can't outsource it." If you go into love carrying a deep sense of lack, then even your devotion starts to become a demand. You want safety, you want worth, you want proof that you matter, and even if you dress that up beautifully, you're still asking another person to build something inside you that was always your job. Ethan lowered his eyes. "But I really loved him," he said quietly. "I would have done anything." Orion shook his head. "I believe that, but that still doesn't make it love. Sometimes what people call love is really dependency. Dependency is fragile. Love has strength. Real love is two free people choosing each other, not two scared people trying to keep each other from drowning." That hit Ethan harder than he expected, because for the first time, he saw it clearly. His biggest mistake wasn't loving too much. It was handing the weight of his inner instability to another person and calling that love. The next day, Orion brought him to the tide well at the center of the harbor. The water rose and fell with the sea, and it was so clear it reflected more than your face. People in the harbor said the well didn't show you who you loved. It showed you what you were really trying to get from love. When Ethan looked into it, he didn't see his former partner. He saw an anxious man, a man terrified of being left, a man who used devotion like a bargain for stability, a man who said, "I choose you," while secretly asking, "Will you stay if I keep giving more?" For the first time, he stopped arguing with the truth. What he had called love had been mixed with fear, appeasement, negotiation. A transaction he never wanted to admit was there. Orion stood beside him and said, "Boundaries aren't cold. They're clarity. They're knowing what is yours to carry and what isn't." Most people make the same mistake in love. They try to change the other person so they can finally feel safe. But trying to change someone so you can feel secure is like trying to change the moon by fixing its reflection in water. Ethan thought about the last 5 years, the reshaping, the yielding, the self-erasing version of patience. He thought being soft would make the relationship stable. Instead, it made him shapeless. And without shape, there's no boundary. Without boundary, there's no integrity. And without integrity, there's very little left for anyone to truly value. At Twinstar Harbor, they understood a hard truth. What costs nothing is rarely cherished. A person who is always available, always yielding, always willing to abandon every principle for someone else, eventually starts to feel less valuable in the other person's mind. It's harsh, but it's human. So Orion told him that healthy love doesn't sound like this: "I'll give up everything for you." It sounds more like this: "I love you, but I'm still myself. I have my own work, my own rhythm, my own principles, and lines I won't cross." That isn't cold, Orion said. That's freedom. It tells the other person, "I didn't choose you because I'd fall apart without you. I chose you because I can stand on my own, and I still want to walk beside you." Later, Orion brought Ethan to the top of the Black Tower. There sat an old double compass used for shared voyages. 2 needles, independent of each other, still moving across the same chart. Orion said, "Intimacy isn't a short game, it's a long one. And in long games, the flashy stuff matters less and less. What matters is character. Can this person grow? Can they stay honest under pressure? Can they handle conflict without becoming cruel? Do they have integrity?" Then he said, "Integrity is expensive, that's why it matters. A person without it may look perfect at first, but pressure strips performance away. And life always brings pressure." Standing there, Ethan realized something had changed inside him. For the first time, he wasn't asking, "Who makes me feel the most?" He was asking, "Who is actually worth building a life with?" A few days later, Orion took him to the quietest place in the harbor, a stretch of coast called Solitude Bay. No ships, no lights, almost no sound. During the day, there was only wind. At night, only stars. It was the kind of place where nothing distracted you from yourself. Orion told him, "This may be the most valuable season of your life, because for the first time in years, you only have yourself. Most people leave one relationship, and immediately start looking for the next one. Not because they're ready, because they're terrified of standing inside their own emptiness. But that's where wholeness begins, not in being chosen again, in learning how to stand alone. Orion left him with two questions. If I ended up living alone, could I still live well? And what kind of partner do I actually want? And have I become the kind of person who could meet them honestly? Those questions cut through one of the biggest illusions in modern love. You don't only attract what you say you want. More often, you attract what you've become. If you want someone steady, honest, generous, and mature, then sooner or later, you have to become that kind of person too. People with real value can tell the difference between someone who comes to take and someone who comes to build. Later, Orion taught Ethan about boundaries. Boundaries aren't walls, he said. They aren't punishment. They aren't emotional distance. They're the hull of the ship. Without them, the sea gets in. And most boundaries begin with one very small word: no. Every dishonest yes stores resentment, and resentment doesn't always explode right away. Most of the time, it grows quietly, in the dark, under the surface. At first, it looks like kindness, patience, maturity. Then one day, it eats the relationship alive. Orion didn't teach Ethan how to reject people harshly. He taught him how to speak clearly. If someone asks for the time you need to come back to yourself, you don't punish them, he said. You tell the truth. I care about you, but I need these 2 hours for myself. That way, what I give you later is real. That isn't rejection, Orion said. That's responsibility. True intimacy doesn't mean collapsing into each other. It means leaving enough room for air. Two pillars can hold up the same temple, but if they lean too hard into each other, the structure falls. That's the paradox. The more whole you are, the more deeply you can bond. Because then love stops coming from fear and starts coming from admiration. On Ethan's last night in the harbor, Orion gave him one final lesson. Don't turn conflict into war. If you win the argument, but turn your teammate into your enemy, you still lose. You're on the same ship. Mature conflict isn't about beating each other. It's about facing the problem together. Then Orion spoke about the deeper problem of the age. In older times, relationships were built around survival. Now people expect one person to be their soulmate, therapist, witness, strategist, entertainer, emotional regulator, and cure for loneliness all at once. That kind of expectation crushes love. So Orion left him with one last line. Raise your standards, lower your expectations. Keep your standards high when it comes to character, values, honesty, and emotional steadiness. But don't expect another human being to understand every part of you, heal every wound, and carry every storm inside you. No one can do that. No one fully understands another person. Loneliness is absolute. Understanding is partial. And once you accept that, something softens. You stop raging at people for not reaching every hidden room inside you, and start being grateful for the parts they can reach. On the day Ethan left Twinstar Harbor, the sky was finally clear. He stood at the edge of the dock and looked up at the two lamps on the black tower, still lighting the same sea, still holding the same steady distance, never collapsing into each other, never losing their own light. And finally, he understood. Real intimacy is not two broken people trying to keep each other alive. It is two people who can carry their own light and still choose to walk side by side. That was the moment Ethan stopped looking for another person to fill what was empty inside him, because he finally understood that emptiness had to be faced from within. So if you're standing in the fog of love right now, don't rush to find the one who will save you. Build yourself first. Learn solitude. Learn how to say no. Learn how to take responsibility for your own happiness. Learn how to become someone who doesn't need rescuing in order to live well, because only then will your love be free. Only then will your choice be clear. And only then will your relationship have a real chance to last.